Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, hello. My name is Emily Tuttle, and I'm truly honored to be here with you all today. Our final panel will discuss the intersections of climate, culture, and resilience. Climate change threatens to alter our diverse customs, cultures, and traditions. Our very ecologies and the health of our people are in danger as the world as we know it becomes unrecognizable. However, humanity's diversity is also its greatest strength in the face of this daunting adversary. Our unique backgrounds and perspectives are the key to altering the trajectory of our world, with bright women figures from every corner of the globe leading the front lines. We are joined today by an esteemed roster of women leaders. Our panel will be moderated by Dr. Genese Sodikoff, an associate professor of anthropology at Rutgers University-Newark. Her research focuses on human-animal relations, zoonosis, conservation and development, and extinction in Madagascar. Her current book investigates the bubonic plague outbreaks in Madagascar and how policies for victims disrupt the people's understanding of kinship and destiny. Our speakers are Hermina Glasshill, an award-winning historian, writer, and ocean advocate. She is the founder and executive director of the Susie King Taylor Women's Institute and Ecology Center, honoring the memory of American heroine of freedom, Susanna Baker King Taylor. Hermina is a recipient of the Georgia Governor's Award for Arts and Humanities for her work in the preservation of Gullah Geechee culture and history. Arielle Martinez Cohen is a climate activist, singer, and songwriter. Arielle has worked closely with the climate justice organization 0 Hour, using music to help propel the movement forward as a proponent for change and as a tool for healing. One of her songs, 2 Minutes to Midnight, was originally used by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists in their announcement of the Doomsday Clock. Katie Lynch is a citizen of the Potawatomi Nation and a 2024 Rutgers graduate with a degree in biomedical engineering. Katie is a Ph.D. student researching indigenous conceptualizations of learning health systems and food sovereignty at the University of Michigan. This year, she was named a champion for change by the Center for Native American Youth at the Aspen Institute. Thank you all for being here, and I'll hand it off to Dr. Sodikoff.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everybody, and especially Rebecca Mark for this invitation and to be on this wonderful panel. And I look forward to getting to know your work more as we talk. Just a bit of a background. So I'm moderating this panel on climate, culture, and resilience because I'm a cultural anthropologist, and we define culture very capaciously, having to do with belief systems, economic practices, political organization, kinship systems, etc. This is a discipline, and cultural anthropology is a discipline that was born in the 19th century during European imperialism and settler colonialism, and they're one of the sort of emotions driving anthropologists' interests in indigenous cultures, in America and elsewhere in the world was this problem of vanishing indigenous cultures, vanishing culture. Had to collect everything to put these things in the museum. And it was a feeling of what Renato Rosaldo called imperialist nostalgia, like this feeling of killing something and then missing the absence of that thing as you're doing it. And since I would say the mid-20th century, we have, in addition to these imperialist political movements, we also have the effects of habitat loss, biodiversity loss, and climate change, what Greta Pegel called the colonization of the atmosphere, adding another burden to people, especially the most marginalized communities in the world. And all of this has impacted culture in very distinctive and diverse ways. So my work in Madagascar originally focused on the politics of biodiversity conservation. And as we learned this morning on about the science of conservation and different interventions, the cause of conservation may be very noble, but as an anthropologist, I was interested in how that unrolls on the ground and why things don't work as well as they should. So investigating how conservation projects unroll on the ground and how they are structured and how people, are expected to accept the distribution of benefits and self-sacrifice. So, why don't things always work as they like? And then more recently, I've been interested in zoonotic diseases or animal to human diseases, which derived from my earlier research living in pretty remote villages as I was doing research and just seeing people's interactions with wildlife and thinking about how, this vulnerability to novel microbes and viruses. And the bubonic plague is an especially interesting disease in Madagascar because of the way it was politicized during the colonial era and how it impacted people's ability to bury the dead as they wished. So all of these public health protocols that were put in place, especially in the 20s and 30s, limited the way people were allowed to handle the dead, bury their dead. And this caused really a sense of existential dread because this was about people's ancestors. And if the ancestors are unhappy or were unhappy, they could cause misery, cause misfortune in people's lives. The plague still exists in Madagascar and breaks out every season. And it's treatable, but a lot of people don't know what they have until it's too late. And those colonial era policies, mortuary policies, are still in place. So this is related to climate change too, because climate change has altered the seasons of plague, the cycle of plague. It alters, the reproduction patterns of the insects and the rats, et cetera. So this is one way, sort of indirect ways in which culture is impacted by climate change, and there's these chain effects, these chain reactions that we don't always think about in terms of climate change, but absolutely are related. Just as habitat loss and biodiversity loss impacts culture, not only what people eat or how they make their livelihoods, but also belief systems around certain species. What happens when those species vanish? How do people adapt? And so these are all important parts of these sense of group identity and how people are forced to adapt very quickly and evolve in the face of these quite rapid changes happening. So those are all very interesting to me. So our panelists today also, are very invested in their own cultural communities and enable us to think about culture in different ways. It doesn't have to be an indigenous society or a traditional society elsewhere in the world, but of course the United States has all sorts of cultural diversity in urban areas and rural areas, et cetera. So my first question to the panelists I want to open up that question and ask you, what is the culture that you identify with in your work? What is your community? And with respect to climate change and environmental change, what's at stake with your communities? Shall we start with Hermina? We'll go down the, okay.
Sure. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize my ancestors with a brief song, and you can join in if you know this song. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water, wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. That's an old Negro spiritual song in memory and commemoration and honor of my grandparents, my grandparents' grandparents, and my grandparents' grandparents who were slaves, who waded through the water and escaped through dismal swamps, across oceans the Ma'afa, the Middle Passage, across rivers, across creeks, across streams. And it's also a way that I not only honor our ancestors with this libation, but it's also about us, where we are now, where I am now, as I began to talk about the lived experiences and the culture of my people. And it's also about who's coming, those who are yet to be born, those whom you and I and all of us will be fighting for a better and a beautiful and a resilient and a joyful world. In the words of our African community, Ashe means, and so it is, Ashe. I am Hermina Glasshill. I live in the coastal Southeast. I live in Georgia. I identify as an African-descended person. I am an eco-womanist, and I am also a historian, and I work with communities around collecting oral histories, community engagement, and using that expertise of local citizens, of communities throughout the Southeast. In the Southeast, from North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, are the Gullah Geechee people. The Gullah Geechee people are descendants of West Africans who did not have a choice to come here during the colonial period. They are the best of the best who survived the Ma'afa, who survived the Middle Passage. And I am a product of the best of the best. And I'm very proud because I know that my people were resilient across over oppression, across centuries, and I am so grateful to be here with you today.
Thank you. Ani, Bojo, Katie and Dejnakas, Barawadmi and Dow, Nishnabé and Dow, Lenape Hoki and Dojbia, Ann Arbor, Michigan and Deda. Hello everyone, my name is Katie. I introduced myself in my traditional language first to acknowledge my ancestors and my relatives and where I come from. I'm a citizen of the Potawatomi Nation, I'm a scholar activist, and currently I'm a Ph.D. student at the University of Michigan Medical School studying health infrastructures and learning systems. So I think before I talk a little bit about climate and climate change and why that impacts my people, I also wanted to share a little bit about kind of like who I am and how I got here. I think it's interesting whenever I introduce myself to people, they always think that I come from a background of public health, but I have an engineering degree, and I just love when people are like, so how the heck did you get here? Because it just proves that like there's not one path to get where you want to go. So I think just thinking about like land and place, my upbringing was very much centered in the place that I grew up. I was born and raised in coastal New Jersey, and I was very much raised in valuing the land that not only I grew up on, but the land that my ancestors lived on. And I think, you know, growing up by the beach, I spent every single summer there. And now living in Michigan, I really feel so far away from a place that I call home. But there's a really interesting dichotomy for me because the University of Michigan is on my ancestral homelands. So the Potawatomi tribes are originally located in Michigan, Citizen Potawatomi, specifically Southeast Michigan, but then due to forced removal, were ultimately removed to Kansas and then to Oklahoma. So there's a really interesting dichotomy in the way that I was brought up around place, and now, you know, going to Rutgers, which is a land-grant university, a land-grant institution, land grant as in, you know, stolen land that was built a university on top of it. And then, you know, going to the University of Michigan, which is on my ancestral homeland. So at Rutgers, I was heavily involved in the Douglas Residential College and the School of Engineering. I was engineering student body president, and I also was the president of the Native American Cultural Association. So there is so much on campus that really, I think, shaped me to be who I am today. And now at the University of Michigan, I study learning health systems. In hindsight, I probably should have made a slide about it because it's so difficult to explain, but the learning health system is a relatively new idea. It came about in 2011 from then the Institute of Medicine, which is now the National Academies of Medicine. But basically kind of like pokes at this idea of taking data, knowledge, and practice and putting them in a continuous feedback loop in order to improve care in hospital systems and other systems of care. So we think about this feedback of data to knowledge, knowledge to practice, practice to data, and thinking about that as like, okay, if you're a patient in a healthcare system, what are the ways in which doctors can continuously learn from the care that you're getting in order to improve care for other people? So the amazing thing about learning health system is that they're very much still developing, but no one is asking Indigenous people what they think about all of this. So what I research is, how are Indigenous people thinking about learning health systems, and what are the ways in which we can incorporate our traditional healing and our traditional knowledges into these systems of care to make them work better for our people. So I think a lot of people would look at my work at kind of like take it at first glance and say, oh, this doesn't really connect to climate. But, as Indigenous peoples, as people who value land as a relative, our existence as humans is interconnected with the existence of the land and the health of the land. Like, you cannot separate the health of the land and the health of us. And I think that is just a core pillar of the work that I do. And yeah, there's so much related to Native people and climate, everything from losing our traditional foodways to the ways in which we're impacted by racial capitalism and so many of the other entrenched isms that exist with our society. But yeah, I just want to say, Chi-miigwech, thank you so much for having me here today, and I look forward to hearing from the other two awesome panelists. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everyone, my name is Arielle. I just want to say, thank you so much for having me. I'm usually more comfortable behind a guitar, so I apologize if I have a little bit of nerves, but I guess I can start as well by kind of introducing myself and my work and then kind of get more into the question. I always like to start by talking about, my why, my reason for doing the work. I actually get that from my adult mentor, Natalie. She would constantly say, in order to continue your passion and continue your drive in this work, like, you have to remember your why. And so for me, I'm from Los Angeles, and I think growing up, I remember just learning things as a kid. Learning not to go into the ocean after it rains because of all the pollution, learning not to go outside because of the air pollution. And that sticks with you. It sucks. And then in 2018, the Woolsey fire happened, and I remember I was in high school. They sent us home, but my mom gave me a call and was packing us up, getting ready to evacuate. And I went to a friend's house to wait it out. Luckily, our house was okay then, but that feeling stuck with me. The air was thick, you could see the air. And that was the first time I kind of used music to cope with all these things that I was feeling. And it really taught me, how music could help. And so I wrote the song The Fire that I performed earlier in 15 minutes. And it was very healing. And, I continued to partner with organizations like 0 Hour, like the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and really, bring music to it, and also just learn from other musicians as well, and be inspired by other musicians. I had a video, but I guess I don't really think it's relevant. I think we can kind of go.
You're gonna sing in another performance, right?
Let's
work
sure.
it in somewhere.
Yeah,
for sure.
We'll figure it out. But I guess
we can. We don't have to do it immediately, but we should definitely work it in.
Yeah. So your question was like what culture we identify with, like what community we're part of and stuff. And so I think my dad, he passed 2 years ago, but he was Jewish. My mom is Mexican German. And to be honest, I felt very disconnected from both of their communities. The Jewish side of my family lived very far away from me. My mom didn't teach me Spanish, and I think she would talk about her childhood. But I kind of really leaned into place as my culture and community. I think But
what about musicians and artists? Was that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, that is true. I think, but from a very young age, I really lean into nature and Los Angeles being my community. And so I think your question about what is lost, I think, so much is at stake. We may lose everything, and that's why we have to keep, working. I think that's also why it's so important to document our history, to document our culture through things like art and music and stuff like that. But yeah, definitely, I also definitely, found a community eventually, I think, in musicians. I started the music team at 0 Hour, and it was a way to kind of keep us connected throughout the pandemic. We were constantly writing songs and putting our emotions about the state of the world, the crisis in the world, into these songs. And, what came out was an art piece that we got to use for events like Earth Day Live in 2020 and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's kind of a full-fledged.
So now I see we have two members with beautiful voices on our panel. Incidentally, I was able to maybe Katie's here? No. So I downloaded Arielle's songs already. You can do it on my End Times playlist. So I love it. Yeah, beautiful. So another theme of our panel is resilience, and I have to say, there's in literature and social science, there's kind of a critical perspective of resilience. It's been celebrated as a good quality to have for individuals and cultural groups. You can withstand adversity. You can rebuild, especially in the face of, climate change, flooding, fires. But it's been critiqued in some ways as enabling, say, states or governments to rely on community resilience and not provide like we see with the dismantling of FEMA, for example. Let's teach them resilience and not sort of help people after a major catastrophe. So it's double-edged, and I wanted to know if you have thoughts about that in your own work, in your passions.
I'll start. I failed to mention something about myself. I grew up in Atlanta. I'm a native Atlantan. I grew up on what I consider now to be a neo-plantation, and that was in public housing. I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. I'm almost 60 years old. And my mother was a single parent, and my parents and my grandparents grew up in Atlanta and segregated Atlanta. This is way before the city too busy to hate. I can remember when I was a kid and I would watch something like Flipper or any of those wonderful ocean shows. And I had never, as a child, even all the way up until 18 years of age, I had never accessed a body of water. Never. I never dipped my toe in a pool, in a river or a creek. In the ghetto, in public housing, the closest that I came to nature was illegally turning on the fire hydrants so that we could cool off during the summer. And that is something that has stuck with me my entire life. That here were these Black bodies, myself included, and the myriad of people who lived in public housing in Atlanta, talk about urban renewal, the previous presentation, had never touched a body of water before. That their access to nature was pseudo, it was a fire hydrant that we illegally turned on to cool off our beautifully dehydrating Black bodies. And so climate change is something that has been with me for all these decades, because I realized that even as a teenager, that the dismal vision of the world is so hot, we're going to burn up. But then later in my college years, I have a master's in history and a bachelor's in history and a master's in heritage conservation. I decided probably almost about 10 years ago that I needed to, since being a teenager, I've traveled all over the world, Africa, South America, Belize, you name it. But since then, I moved to the Georgia coast. And in moving to the Georgia coast, I felt this liberating experience of being able to freely go into the ocean and enjoy the beauty and the coolness of the water on my skin. And being able to freely do that because during COVID, I had invited my family down from Atlanta to the Georgia coast, and my nieces and nephews had never been to the ocean, had never seen the ocean before. My mom and my sisters were with me, and we'd gone to St. Simon's Island. And in going to St. Simon's Island during COVID, it was 2020, some white folks stopped us and said, "Where are y'all going? Don't y'all know it's COVID? You're all about to infect everybody on the beach." And so these intersectionalities of racism, when I started this work in 1996, we didn't say environmental justice. We were using environmental racism because that's what it was. And I'm really thankful because this projection into this sense of solutions and environmental justice and climate justice, that it is a mindset, a shift in our mindset in terms of what can we do about this as solutions. So now I live on the Georgia coast within the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. I have been a cityfied girl my entire life. I knew nothing about the country or rural living. My husband and I, we get there and we realize that we are living between hurricane storms, the names of storms. Every year there's a storm, twice a year, whether it's Matthew or Ian or Dorian or Helene. Our bookends to life is that we are living between storms, and the frequency and the intensity of these storms, we live within that on the southeast, on the Georgia coast. And it was in 2018 that I had heard from afar the experiences of people that live on the coast, what their lived experiences were in living on the coast. And as Rebecca talked about Katrina, which is something that's etched in my mind, I was traumatized myself from watching it day in and day out. There was nothing about Katrina I did not watch. And so 2018, 2019, a hurricane hits, and my husband and I, we have purchased, like the big bad wolf, we have purchased a brick house. So we are not worried. Well, I am not worried, at least. And the authorities, the emergency management, the system, the Liberty County authorities are encouraging citizens. Now, at this point, it is mandatory that people evacuate. And I was like, I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm not going to go anywhere. But here's the thing for me is to never lose the sense of empathy and sense of passion for our neighbors. Because while I live in a subdivision with modern homes, brick, 2-level, big backyards, many people in rural southeast, especially rural Georgia, don't have that luxury of living in stability. Homes are modular, mobile, and so when the storm hit, and we were required to evacuate, here's the intersectionality of these experiences. Eventually, my husband encourages me that I done took and told you, you are leaving, because I wanted to stick it out. We get on the highway is bottlenecked. There's only one way into Savannah, and that's two ways. That's I-95 South and I-16 East-West. So we're headed east to Atlanta, and the traffic is bottlenecked, and the storm is behind us. And the reality of that moment is that where's the right infrastructure for this place? Where are the roads that would lead us beyond just this one bottlenecked escape route in which we all were really stuck for hours? People ran out of gas on the highway. And it's at that point that I realized that given who I am, I bring my entire self to this work. A Black woman, an eco-womanist, a person of faith, an activist, a writer, a historian, story and I bring it all into this work because that's how I know that I can contribute to making the change. And so when we are driving to Atlanta, it's bottlenecked almost halfway to Atlanta, and that's 250 miles. So about 100 miles, you're bottlenecked. And so if you didn't fill up, it's just tough. You're on the side of the road. And so the low and moderate income residents who live in the area, specifically in Savannah, it's already low-lying areas. Gullah Geechee people were relegated to these isolated places where they developed culture, where they created these new cultural norms and values and behaviors and systems of knowledge that have existed over centuries, at least since 1619. That this culture has been a living, breathing experience for people of African descent, and many of their communities were flooded.
So they've survived. So they would say they're resilient because they've survived.
Resilient because they have survived, but there is a sense that our government is not doing enough. They're not doing enough. It's high tide, it's high time that we approach our elected officials and demand that they begin to hear the stories of the residents, the constituents, the stakeholders who have so much to lose. Because when it comes to the culture, talk about the built environment, the cemeteries.
Let's
Okay.
put that on pause.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Okay.
Katie, can you talk a bit about, I mean, again, there's a traditional medicine, and Native American societies continues, and so how do you kind of relate that to resilience and?
Yeah, so I kind of have a complicated relationship with the term resilience. I think, as you mentioned, there's kind of this positive connotation of being able to go through things and come out on the other side. But I have recently changed my verbiage to use the term survivance. And I think that much better characterizes like the things that my ancestors went through and the things that honestly my generation is going through right now. I think about this idea of resilience and I think it's incredible that my culture and my tribe and my people have persisted as long as they have. But I also think that they shouldn't have had to go through the things that they did. They shouldn't have had to survive boarding schools and, years of oppression. They shouldn't have had to have their culture stripped of them. Like there's so many things that, Native Americans in this country have endured and they shouldn't have had to. So I think that's why I have this complicated relationship where it's it's incredible that my culture has survived this long, but it also shouldn't have had to go through the trials and tribulations that it did. And I think something that I particularly focus on in my research is strengths-based research, specifically with Indigenous communities in the context of healthcare research. It's so extractive. You have these researchers just going into Native communities, taking their data, leaving, and then doing whatever the heck they want with it. And for me, I take a community-based participatory research or CBPR approach to my work because I believe that at the end of the day, we can do better science by learning from our communities. And I think that if we can focus on what's right with our communities rather than what's wrong with them, we can actually collaborate them to come up with solutions that are going to benefit them in the long run. And I really have seen, people treat Native communities like problems that need to be solved, when in reality, there's just so much intergenerational joy and culture that lives within our communities that we would talk about if people just asked. But constantly, when I share with folks that I'm Native, they just want to talk about, intergenerational trauma and settler colonialism, and I will talk about those things because you cannot understand Native identities without understanding those things. But there is so much more to Native people than the trauma that we have endured. And by focusing on strengths-based research and focusing on the things that have enabled our culture to survive as long as it has, that is how you create community-based solutions that will truly impact the communities that you're trying to serve.
Thank you. And Arielle, in your case, having your family home go up in smoke, what about that neighborhood?
Yeah, so, it's an interesting question. Luckily, I think, yes, our house did burn down, but my mom got, that evacuation notice. She was able to bring our collective family memories, our photos and stuff like that with her. I know so many people in the Altadena neighborhood in Los Angeles, lost their homes, didn't have enough time to evacuate to grab what they needed, are having a hard time rebuilding because insurance won't cover it. And it's just incredibly disheartening. And I think on the note of resilience, I think, yes, we need to do the work to make sure that the government does take care of the people, but the government has never protected everybody in this country, unfortunately, specifically BIPOC communities. And I think it's hard to expect them to when they have never done it. And so I think as we're working towards that, I think resilience, unfortunately is needed. Yeah.
I also wanted to bring up this idea of, because it came up in the panel, Manasa talked about culture and moving, when forced to migrate. And so often we think of one's culture, one's social group as place-based. And so I'm interested in, the sensory world of the place that that you are sort of tied to, or the memories, et cetera. A lot of times we don't notice the changes that are happening so rapidly as a climate and environment change, but the sounds that we hear, maybe as a musician you kind of are tuned to this. And I noticed in Madagascar, the bird song isn't the same as 20 years ago. The lemur calls that used to be existing here in this forest stand are no longer there. Those kinds of things people notice. It was the problem of heat and how that affects mood, and all of these things changing rapidly or seasonally, but again, impacting what that sense of place and what home feels like, or what culture feels like to you. It's more than just the imagination or practices. It also sort of, it's our sensorium, all of our senses. So that rootedness to place, which also includes burial grounds, obviously. Mm-hmm. So I just wondered if you wanted to talk a bit about those kind of extra, the other kinds of moods and senses and the roots to place that that may be rapidly changing or seasonally changing pretty dramatically in recent times.
Sure. So the South Atlantic Bight has the largest mass of marsh, coastal marsh in the Southeast. And to live next to the marsh, you drive over a marsh. There's a bridge over almost every marsh and river in the Southeast. How many of you have ever gone to maybe St. Simon's or Hilton Head or Florida? You're crossing over a body of water almost every day. So the sound of the water becomes a part of you, becomes a part of your life. The sounds of the tree frogs croaking at night, especially when they're mating, the sense of the sense of migratory birds that we see almost every day. It's really a beautiful paradise that's overlaid with this impact of climate change and climate injustice. And so for me, it is a beautiful thing, a joyous thing to wake up in the morning and to open my curtains and to see the sun rising over the horizon and to hear the birds chirping. But there are situations like, for instance, when I was a kid, we would catch fireflies. But now in our area, there is the pesticides that the county runs, and so we don't see fireflies anymore. I mean, the night would light up like magic with fireflies, and they're not there anymore. So that sense of longing for the things that lost, the species that are lost, is with us almost every day. And for those Gullah Geechee people who have lived for hundreds of years and the marsh is a part of their lives, I was speaking with someone last night, Nadia, I don't know if she's here, but I was speaking with Nadia last night, or the person who's studying history. But anyway, the marsh is a source for resources for creating baskets that are utilitarian for carrying things, not just for for art, but for use in your household. When they were created during the enslavement period, it was to carry rice. It was to use for things that were needed on the plantation. But today, the erosion of the marsh these days impacts the livelihoods of Gullah Geechee people every single day. And the loss of that, from erosion to marsh migration to, all of those things impacts how we see and view the world. And the loss of that is something that I think everybody feels it in their soul. They feel it in their bodies because it's so much a part of who we are.
Thank you. Yeah, that was really beautiful. I think there's a few examples that I'm thinking of tangibly. The first is I spent 2 summers in DC when I was an undergrad. The first, I interned at Merck Animal Health in Animal Health Public Policy and Government Relations. My second summer, I interned at the White House in the Biden-Harris administration, working in the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And my first DC summer, people had told me it was going to be hot, but I didn't know what I was expecting. And when I got there, I was like, okay, it's really hot here. I grew up on the beach where the specific heat of water it moderates the temperature. My marine biology high school is showing. But yeah, so I was like, oh, it'll probably be hot, but it won't be that bad. And that was I remember the hottest summer I experienced. And then the second summer I came back, it was even worse. And I just remember standing on the front lawn of the White House waiting for President Biden to come out so we could take a picture with him. And all of us were wearing blazers and work attire. And we are sweating our butts off waiting for this man for 3 hours on the front lawn of the White House because the Houston Astros were in the White House because they had won the World Series or whatever sport they play. But Michigan football is the only thing I follow. But I just remember in that moment realizing such severe difference in heat just over one summer. So I think that was something where it really struck me the rate at which climate change is accelerating and really how easy it is to understand that specifically in a physical sense. And also to your question about connection to place, I think about that a lot, especially as a student at the University of Michigan. Like I mentioned, the university was built on my ancestral homelands. And I think, every time I walk on campus, I think about the buildings that exist there today. And I also reflect on what would this place have looked like before all of this? And I think I feel a deep connection, obviously, because my ancestors had lived there before they were relocated, but also because they had used that land to survive for so long. And I think, when I have days where I'm oh, I hate academia, or this is so hard, especially days like yesterday when there's so much happening in the DEI and health equity worlds, I'm reminded that, my ancestors survived off of this land for so long. And, being a student at that university is an act of resistance in and of itself, because universities like this, universities like Michigan, were never built for Native people, and they will never support Native people. I think it was Arielle that just said the government will never save us. These universities will not save us either.
Yeah.
Now is the time when we're realizing the importance of community building in all of this, and connectedness and global solidarity. But all of that to say, I think that specifically for university students, it can be hard to feel connection to place because you're moving around so much. At least for me, it felt like I was moving into Rutgers and then out of Rutgers and to somewhere else and then back to Rutgers and somewhere else, and it was so chaotic. But I think, recognizing the places where you feel grounded and you feel whole. And for me, that's, getting outside, getting to the beach, getting to, in Michigan, the lakes, because they don't have beaches there. But it's really, really helpful in grounding myself and making sure that I can do the best work for my community.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with kind of losing a connection to sense of place, in college specifically. I think that was interesting. But I guess back to your question,
maybe more to the point. So the recorded song that you have, is that 2 Minutes to Midnight, or is
it is.
Now is it a good time to play that, or is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could play it, yeah.
Or sing it,
I put my guitar in the other room, but usually I would whip it out. Okay, yeah. I mean, maybe somebody else.
I mean, I don't, I don't know what the lyrics to that song are, so it might,
Yeah,
it
I
might
mean,
be
they're pretty dire. The idea is.
We're supposed to stay upbeat, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to like make everybody depressed, but
No.
I mean, I will, and I think I always try to include a message of hope in the lyrics. With these specifically, though, they're based on the doomsday clock put on by the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which predicts how close we are to the end of the world based on climate change, nuclear warfare, all of
Well, it's interesting because I think we're feeling it. I mean, even winters in New Jersey have changed so much in the past decade.
Right.
It's very
We're
rare that
feeling
we get a big snowfall. I used to have like 2 huge walls on each side of my driveway. I had to navigate out the driveway, but now it's very rare to see that much, and it's happening so fast. So
exactly, no, it is dire. Yeah. There were a couple things that I did think of that I would love to share, just about like Los Angeles, because I think. Back to like the color of the ocean. I think like I remember it being a much brighter green when I was younger, and now it frankly, it's not a natural color because of all the pollution and stuff. And so I think, I until now, I never actually really thought about, okay, why didn't I go to the beach as much when I was older, because that's such a big part of like our community and stuff like that in Los Angeles. And I think it was because of that. Like I couldn't go swimming, it was like a risk to our health. And so I think that was really hard. I also think about, I was lucky enough to like live next to nature in Los Angeles, because I know a lot of people are more inner city. But I haven't been back since the fire, and the thing that scares me is that I know there was this park that I went to called Will Rogers Park that burned down, and I remember my favorite thing to do was just to sit outside and listen to the trees like in the breeze and stuff like that, and it's completely gone, and nothing scares me more than to like see that. So it's definitely a really hard subject.
Hi, thank you guys so much for being here and for all your insights so far. So I grew up and I'm from Manahawkin, New Jersey, which is a town in South Jersey on the coast. And in 2012, we were hit really hard by Hurricane Sandy, and I lost my home. And so a lot of what you're saying is really resonating with me. And I was thinking about, after Sandy, and especially during COVID, a lot of people have been moving to Manahawkin, and it's become a lot bigger than it was when I was growing up. And because of that, a lot of people kind of miss the history of, where I've grown up and the culture of this coastal town. And so I guess we can't just push people out or make them go away. We have to incorporate them. But I guess how do we share the culture of a place with people, like outside people that are coming in, and making sure that they know the history of it and how to respect it and how to respect the changes that have happened and the climate of this place, and protect it from climate change and infrastructure and things like that.
So are you the history major that I spoke?
Yes.
I thought you looked familiar. What? Right. I spoke to Nadia, I didn't know. But yes. So with me, being an oral and public historian, I work very closely with the Historical Society, our Georgia Historical Society, in recognizing the significance of historic sites. And so how many of you have heard of root shock? So root shock is like the disappearance of these places that are really important to you. And when you go back to those places and you no longer see them, that they've disappeared on the landscape, you have this sense of longing for that place. And so when it comes to, I'm also the president of the Historical Society in my county, but so I work with the State Historical Society in collaborating with communities around what's not there anymore. They're like ghost fixtures on the landscape. You know that they were there. You know that there is a story there because the land also tells a story. The Ninth Ward still is telling a story. And so as the land is telling that story, I think that as I open up with that, this deep sense of empathy and compassion, storytelling is extremely important. And so we have created historical markers and kiosks through sites that have disappeared, whether they be floating cemeteries that were once there, or historic faith institutions that were once there, or local high schools that used to be there, because I'm just going to be transparent and honest about this. Before integration of schools in the 1960s, Black communities had their own schools. And when integration was enforced, when integration was finally enforced years after Brown v. Board of Education, these people in communities had to leave their schools and go to different places, and then eventually, once integration occurred, their schools were torn down. And so your school, your high school, your elementary school, it's very much a part of you. I know you all probably go to class reunions and all of that, but there are communities that cannot go back. So historic markers and kiosks are a way of telling the story of the land and what happened on that land. And I think that many communities are beginning to have buy-in into how important, we talked about the importance of history, how important history is in helping us to stay connected in a way that shores us up, builds us up, helps us to be fortified as we work together in the work of environmental justice, environmental sustainability, and that's a way to preserve the story as many communities are being gentrified throughout our country.
Thank you. Thank you. Shall we present our artist once again, Arielle Martinez? 2 minutes to midnight.
Yes. The clock tick, tick, ticks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Eyes are open wide. And the clock tick, tick, tick. Stomach is feeling sick under the covers you lie. Then the phone, it starts to ring. Someone screaming. It's 2 minutes to midnight. Only 2 minutes to midnight. The sweat drip, drip, drips down your face to your lips, sitting straight up in your bed. The trembling spreads down to your fingertips. Is it just all in your head? Then the sirens start to wail as the system starts to fail. It's 2 minutes to midnight. Only 2 minutes to midnight. As the rocket's red glare, missiles cut through the air. Will we survive the rise and fall? Will our history repeat? Or will we plant the seeds to rise above it all? Then the phone, it starts to ring.